The groom laughed the moment she stepped off the train. It was not a nervous laugh or an awkward smile, it was loud, sharp, and cruel. People standing on the small wooden platform turned to look. Some smirked, others whispered. The young woman froze, one hand gripping her worn suitcase, the other trembling at her side. She had traveled for days across states, following a promise written in careful letters, sealed with words of love and forever. She had believed them all. Her dress was simple, faded from many washes, chosen carefully because it was the best she owned. The journey had wrinkled it, and dust clung to the hem. She tried to smooth it down, suddenly aware of how small and out of place she looked in this unfamiliar American town. The groom took one look at her and shook his head, still laughing, as if she were a joke played at his expense. "So this is what they sent me," he said loudly. "I expected better." Her heart dropped. The words hit harder than the long journey, harder than hunger or exhaustion. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to remind him of his promises, but no sound came out. Her throat felt tight, like it had closed completely. The groom waved his hand dismissively, turned on his heel, and walked away without another glance. The train whistle blew behind her, long and lonely. Doors slammed shut. The engine groaned as it pulled away, carrying with it the only path back. She watched until it disappeared around the bend, feeling as though the last thread tying her to hope had snapped. Her knees weakened, and she sat heavily on a bench near the platform, lowering her face into her hands. She cried quietly at first, then harder, unable to stop. Every mile she had traveled replayed in her mind. Every letter she had reread at night. She had left behind everything, her home, her safety, her pride, believing she was stepping into a new life. Instead, she was abandoned in a strange place by a man who had promised her forever. The town moved on around her. Boots passed by. A wagon rattled down the dirt road. No one stopped. No one asked her name. A short distance away, a rancher had witnessed everything. He had come to town to handle business, nothing more. He was used to minding his own affairs, used to silence and long days under the open sky. But when he saw the young woman's shoulders shaking, saw the way she tried to make herself invisible on that bench, something tightened in his chest. He stood still for a moment, torn between habit and instinct. Then, slowly, he turned back toward the platform and took a step in her direction, unaware that this single decision was about to change both their lives forever. The rancher hesitated before approaching her. He was not a man who interfered in the lives of others, especially not in a town where everyone noticed everything. Yet the sound of her quiet sobs carried across the platform, cutting through the usual noise of boots and voices. He adjusted the brim of his hat and walked closer, stopping a few steps away so as not to frighten her. "Miss," he said gently, his voice low and steady. "Are you all right?" She looked up in surprise, quickly wiping her tears, embarrassed to be seen in such a state. Her eyes were red and swollen, and her hands shook as she tried to compose herself. She nodded, though the lie was obvious. The rancher noticed the small suitcase at her feet, its handle worn smooth by travel, and the way she clutched it as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. He took off his coat and held it out to her. "It's cold out here," he said simply. She hesitated, pride battling desperation, then accepted it with a quiet thank you. The coat was heavy and warm, carrying the faint scent of leather and dust. It made her feel safer than she had in days. They sat on opposite ends of the bench, the space between them filled with unspoken questions. After a long moment, she began to speak. Her words came slowly at first, then rushed out as if she were afraid they might disappear. She told him about the letters, the promise of marriage, the journey across states, and the laughter that greeted her instead of welcome. She did not blame the groom outright, she simply stated the facts, though her voice cracked more than once. The rancher listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened when she described the public humiliation, but he said nothing. When she finished, she stared at the ground, ashamed of her own hopefulness. "I don't know anyone here," she whispered. "I don't even know where to go." The rancher leaned back, looking toward the open road beyond the station. He had lived alone on his ranch for years, following the same routines day after day. Loneliness had become familiar, almost comfortable. Bringing a stranger into his world was not something he had planned, or even considered. Yet he could not ignore the truth standing before him. Leaving her here felt wrong. Dangerous. Cruel. "There's a place you can stay," he said at last. "My ranch is a few miles out of town. It's not much, but it's safe." She turned to him sharply, disbelief flashing across her face. "I can work," she said quickly. "I don't want charity." He met her gaze, steady and calm. "I won't take charity either," he replied. "You help if you want. Or you rest. That's your choice." Silence settled between them again, heavier this time but not uncomfortable. Finally, she nodded, fear and relief mixing in her chest. As they stood and began walking away from the platform together, neither of them realized that this simple act of kindness, offered without conditions, was laying the foundation for something neither had been searching for, but both desperately needed. The ranch lay beyond the edge of town, where the dirt road stretched wide and the sky seemed endless. When they arrived, the sun was already lowering, painting the fields in soft gold. The house was simple, wooden, weathered, and strong, much like the man who lived in it. She stepped down from the wagon slowly, unsure of what awaited her, yet feeling calmer than she had since leaving the train station. The rancher showed her inside without many words. There was a small kitchen, a sturdy table, and a fireplace that held the warmth of past winters. He pointed to a spare room at the back of the house. "You can have that one," he said. "Lock the door if it makes you comfortable." The thoughtfulness in his words surprised her. For the first time in days, she felt truly safe. The next morning, she woke early to the sound of animals and the smell of coffee. She offered to help, and the rancher accepted without hesitation, showing her small tasks she could manage. She swept the floor, prepared meals, and learned how to feed the chickens. The work was honest and tiring, but it gave her purpose. Each task helped quiet the shame and fear still lingering in her heart. Days turned into weeks. The rancher remained respectful and distant, never crossing boundaries or asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. At night, they ate dinner together, exchanging simple stories about weather, work, and the land. Slowly, her laughter returned, soft at first, then freer. The rancher noticed how the house felt less empty when she smiled. She discovered that the rancher carried his own wounds. His wife had passed years ago, leaving behind a silence he never learned how to fill. He spoke of her rarely, but when he did, his voice was steady, filled with quiet respect. She listened carefully, understanding grief more deeply than she wished to. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast. Rain pounded the roof, and thunder shook the windows. Startled by the noise, she froze, memories of past hardships rushing back. The rancher noticed her pale face and offered quiet reassurance, sitting nearby until the storm passed. He didn't touch her or push her to speak, he simply stayed. That simple presence meant more to her than words ever could. Trust grew naturally between them, built on small gestures and shared silence. She realized that kindness did not always arrive loudly or dramatically. Sometimes it came in the form of patience, respect, and space to heal. By the end of the third week, she stood in the field watching the sunset, feeling something new take root inside her. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to belong. And the rancher, watching her from a distance, felt the loneliness he had carried for years slowly loosen its grip, replaced by a fragile, unexpected hope. The evening air was calm, filled with the soft sounds of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. She stood near the fence, watching the sun sink behind the white American fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was in moments like this that she realized how far she had come, from a broken promise at a train station to a place where her heart no longer felt heavy. The rancher joined her quietly, resting his arms on the fence beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. Silence had become something they shared comfortably, no longer awkward or painful. Finally, she broke it. "I never thanked you properly," she said. "If you hadn't stopped that day, I don't know what would have happened to me." He shook his head gently. "You're stronger than you think," he replied. "You would have found your way." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and realized how much his presence had meant. He had never raised his voice, never demanded gratitude, never treated her like a burden. He had simply given her space to heal. Her chest tightened with emotion. "I was supposed to leave," she admitted. "I planned to find work in town once I saved enough. But every day I stay here, it feels more like home." Her voice trembled, not with fear this time, but with honesty. The rancher turned toward her, surprised but careful. "I didn't want to assume anything," he said. "I didn't want you to feel trapped." "I don't," she said quickly. "I feel chosen." The word hung between them, fragile and powerful. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight he had carried for years. He confessed that he had grown used to being alone, convinced that love had passed him by. But her presence had reminded him that life could still surprise him. There was no dramatic declaration, no sudden embrace. Instead, there was respect. He asked if she wished to stay, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. She answered yes without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, the town that once watched her be humiliated saw her return differently. She walked with confidence now, no longer bowed by shame. Whispers faded. Respect replaced curiosity. The rancher stood beside her, not as a rescuer, but as a partner. One quiet morning, as they shared coffee under the rising sun, he spoke of forever, not as a promise made lightly, but as a choice renewed every day. This time, there was no laughter meant to wound, no crowd to judge. Only two people who had found dignity in each other. The train that once carried her into heartbreak had unknowingly delivered her to a life built on kindness, patience, and truth. What began with rejection ended with belonging. And in a place where she was once offered cruelty, she was finally offered forever.